Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
The sea breeze playfully fluttered the curtains of the wide-open windows in room 13 of the Albatross Hotel. The dark blue sky, which seemed unrealistically low, was studded with 1,000 stars. Cindy sat on the edge of the bed and stared out into the night's height and infinity, swallowing her tears and trying not to pay attention to the way her husband was struggling with the knot of his tie, pulling on a suit he'd hastily bought before a corporate party. And that these hysterics to me no longer arranged, he threw, frowning at his reflection in the mirror. Got it? Got it, Cindy sighed and sniffled. This was supposed to be their first family vacation, and it turned out Harvey was leaving her for a mistress. He generously promised that he'd be back in the morning, so they could go on some excursion, because, as he said to himself, he wasn't a monster to leave his redneck without a cultural program. I picked you up on the street, grinned her husband, turning away from the mirrored door of the closet. You're supposed to kiss my feet, so… Oh, Cindy, you'd better shut up. You're going to end up back in the dumpster. Got it? Yes, the girl nodded. Actually, she would never have said that out loud, but over the last 6 months it had begun to seem to her that if she were a dog, she would be more inclined than any other dog to memorize and obey every command perfectly. Because it was this obedience and following orders that her own husband now constantly demanded of her. Cindy was born in a small mining town and was a round orphan mom, and Dad died when the girl was 6 years old in a car accident. She was saved from the orphanage by a great-aunt and in principle, though she did not spoil her with affection, but did not offend her. But then she also passed away. A short-lived cancer took away the last close person neatly under Cindy's 18th birthday. In the meantime, the house they lived in had fallen into disrepair and was about to be declared an emergency. Cindy had just graduated from high school and was struggling to make a living, doing anything to get paid. Harvey came to town on a business trip. He was a senior manager for a trucking company. Once he went for a snack in a local cafe, but in fact in an inexpensive canteen, and naturally, as a sophisticated service resident of the big city, was terribly dissatisfied with everything. Cindy worked there as a waitress, served his table. She took all the claims, apologized, and then, along with tips, she fell on her tray a note with a phone number. And she called it, and then Harvey asked her out. And on the third date, he told her what he wanted. And he wanted to ask her to marry him. He immediately voiced his attitude: serious relationship, a strong family, where the wife is engaged in the house and husband, and not spinning her tail, building her career, or some other nonsense doing. Harvey wasn't a clairvoyant and didn't have the talents of FBI profilers, but he vividly recognized Cindy as inexperienced, timid, and most importantly, driven. Just the kind of woman he needed. At first, Cindy felt like Cinderella, who had lived to see her happily ever after. She sincerely tried to please her husband in everything, and his discontent, reproaches, and admonitions were taken for granted and even useful, because she had to learn to be a good wife. Harvey decided how much to allocate for food, clothing, entertainment, and himself. By the way, he always kept in priority 3 cutlettes on a plate for him, 1 for his wife, a new sheepskin coat for winter, because the old one had frayed sleeves. Boots, my husband frowned once. Then, you put on 2 socks in the fall and it will be fine. Where do you have to go so much? To the store. Nothing. Our grandmothers wandered around in felt boots and sang songs. So, stop fooling around, Cindy. Don't make me feel bad. In the 3rd year of marriage, Cindy tried to talk about how she should get an education. Well, maybe at least learn to be a manicurist. Then she could get a part-time job in her spare time. Of course, she'd have to buy materials, she said with a shy smile, after a particularly delicious lunch, when she'd baked her husband's favorite charlotte for dessert, which Cindy hoped would make him feel better, but it would all pay off quickly. And then, what did I tell you? Harvey lowered his voice. What did I teach you? What kind of manicure, I ask you? Well, I could still learn to be an accountant and work from home, Cindy said sadly. A wife should obey her husband and do everything for him. Harvey shouted and banged his fist on the table so hard that all the dishes clinked, as if they too had realized who was the master of the house and who was not to be crossed under any circumstances. Cindy didn't. She thought for the first time that her husband was being unfair to her. She couldn't understand what was wrong with her wanting to be able to earn money too. Things could happen. Maybe he'd lose his job, and while he was looking for a new one, her penny would come in handy. And then, Cindy was terribly afraid to admit it, but sometimes she wondered what would happen to her if one day Harvey fell out of love with her. What would she do then? She didn't even have a place to live in her hometown. They'd sold it as soon as they were married, and the proceeds went into the family budget. What did they buy with it? I think they upgraded Harvey's car and took in appliances. However, Cindy tried to chase such harmful and also ungrateful, stupid thoughts away from herself. After all, on the whole, their marriage was normal. Yes, that was the definition she most often thought of. And she also tried with the diligence of a lost traveler in the winter woods, trying to keep the fire burning, to do her part to make sure that nothing threatened the marriage from her side. Because Cindy loved Harvey after all. Yes, things had gotten complicated at times in their relationship. But how many other moments were there when it was enough for her to cuddle up to her husband in the evening, to take shelter under his strong arm, and the whole outside world seemed to disappear, to melt away. Only the two of them remained, and it seemed that all the difficulties were just vanity and trifles. But love, real and strong, was still there in their union. It's just sometimes hard to see it behind life's troubles, stresses and all that. So when 3 months ago Harvey announced that they would go on vacation and to the sea, Cindy decided that now, perhaps, she should consider herself the happiest person in the world. She wouldn't have dared to ask about it directly, but she thought it was Harvey's way of making amends for all that had gone wrong between them. He even, by the way, gave her a good amount of money to go shopping, because it was necessary to take a new swimsuit, beach towels, sunscreen, travel. By the way, Harvey, that is called, snatched a gorgeous last hop tour to a small island country south of India. The manager in the travel agency lulled Nightingale Country, this relatively recently decided to open for tourists and get there, in fact, was a huge success. Travelers expected clean, golden beaches, a national park with endemic species of birds and butterflies, city tours, and even the opportunity to admire the palace of the local ruler from afar. Formerly, it was a prince in his dynasty, but in the international press, often this man was called dictator. The main thing, of course, is to follow the rules, said the manager of the travel agency after the trip was sold. Local etiquette, you know. Yeah, Harvey said absent-mindedly, who had just gotten a text message from work, but not about work. Here, take a booklet. The manager smiled sweetly and handed out a mini magazine, which told all sorts of tempting things for tourists, plus gave the very recommendations on how not to get into a lot of trouble. The thing was that the code of laws of this country differed in some respects draconian rules. In particular, it was forbidden to take out local money because they depicted members of the royal family. It was also forbidden to take shells from local beaches as souvenirs. Harvey took the booklet and stuck it in his pocket later. At home, let his wife read it and enjoy it. Right now, he had more important things to worry about. For a whole month, Harvey had been having an affair with Sarah from the personnel department at work. She was a tidbit divorced, but not a single mother. In a new marriage is not raring to go, sits on the fitness, figure appetizing, and most importantly nature passionate. Harvey she quickly took in a turn, and he, although in principle previously did not think about cheating on his wife, quickly decided that in vain, limited himself, loyalty kept Cindy. In general, she was the right woman for him, as a mistress in the house. But there was no passion, no fire like that in a long time. Her provincial innocence quickly became tiresome, and both women were like yin and yang. Cindy was naturally brown with straight hair below the shoulders, gray eyes, all thin and thin. Sarah artificial platinum blonde with green eyes. She could make up so that looked like a girl from the cover, dressed on the edge of propriety, and how she could laugh, poured on mermaid seductively, just so soul-taking out. And now she sent a message, so, I'm going on vacation. Sorry, honey, you'll have to do without me, because I'm flying to the tropics. Harvey grinned, and as soon as he left the office of the travel agency, dialed the number of his mistress. Sarah, sugar, you know, I'm going on vacation too. Well, no, not alone. Who cares? I'll tell her she'll sit down. She won't make a peep. So, get ready, my girl. In general, Harvey was not going to cheat on vacation so quickly, he thought, the first couple of days really spend with his wife, and then as a dessert to the mistress. But in the evening, when he reached for Cindy, she suddenly turned away, saying that she was tired after the road, that she was nauseous because she'd eaten something wrong, that she had a headache. Harvey was in a different mood, and when he realized he couldn't get any affection from his wife, he just snapped, because he didn't understand. I mean, can't you just be patient? He feeds and drinks this fool. He brought her to the seaside, and she turns her nose up. Her head hurts, you see. So it's her own fault that he's leaving now. The time was 8 o'clock in the evening, and the day in these latitudes was ending unusually early and abruptly, replaced by a humid, stuffy night. Harvey snorted and went into the shower. Then he began to dress and even began to hum something under his nose. "Where are you going?" his wife asked. He looked at her and wrinkled his nose. She was pale, with bags under her eyes, wrapped under a blanket as if she were freezing, her face wrinkled with displeasure. "Go for a walk, or do you think I gave all this money to hang out with you?" "No, Cindy, you're not gonna ruin my vacation. You want to spend it in a hotel room. You're welcome, but don't whine to me afterward, you hear me?" Then Harvey reminded the girl where he'd picked her up from, and he slammed the door loudly and with all his might left the room. Cindy leaned back on the bed, buried herself in the pillows. She covered her eyes in the hope that she would doze off and sleep would ease her physical suffering. But what about her soul? It must have been half an hour. I couldn't fall asleep. From somewhere downstairs in the courtyard of the hotel, music and songs could be heard. Cindy squeezed her eyes shut and wiped away her tears, imagining her husband coming back in the morning, and her lying there like an abandoned, old and unnecessary thing. And he would come back, bringing another woman's scent, as if imprinted with the traces of someone else's caresses. Cindy had long ago guessed that Harvey had a mistress. She'd begun to suspect it almost a month ago. It was like a strange female instinct kicked in. The husband was different. It was so subtle and yet so obvious that it was impossible to put the change down to anything else. And now, while he was in the shower, she was quite bold and took his phone, and in the last messages with a contact labeled as accountant, Senior had explicitly stated that he was coming over, that they would go to a restaurant to eat shrimp, and then she would show him. There was a picture attached, but Cindy squeamishly threw the phone away. She was shaking. She'd never been so disgusted in her life, but she didn't say anything. She could have sworn on her life that talking wouldn't have changed anything. There was a burst of laughter under the windows, then something clapped, whistled, and right in front of the balcony of the room where Cindy was in the cocoon of the blanket, fireworks burst out, scattering myriads of golden and scarlet sparks. The girl involuntarily smiled at such a sight, like a fairy tale flower made of fire and precious stones that could not be ignored. Nobody died, did they? It's just her husband cheating, Cindy suddenly told herself. It was something strange. She suddenly realized she didn't want to cry anymore. It wasn't the tears that had run out. It wasn't the pain of her husband's cheating that had devastated her. It was just, she didn't want to cry anymore. And she also thought that it was really bad for her when she lost her mom and dad, even though she doesn't remember it almost. And now, her husband cheated on her. Not her first, not her last, as they say. She felt better, too. The nausea and headache were gone, and it was unbearably hot under the blanket. Cindy threw it off, sat up, put her feet on the floor, and then, as she was in her pajama shorts and tank top with thin straps, went out onto the balcony. She leaned on the railing and leaned forward and down. The sea, almost black in the night, but glowing with lights from the stars, the yachts moored in the harbor, and, of course, from the moon's path. It was noticeably cooler and fresher. The hotel staff, concerned about the guests' revelry, had dispersed those who had set off the fireworks, and now the courtyard below was empty. Cindy bit her lip and smiled at the thought that suddenly occurred to her. What if she went for a walk right now? After all, it was the first time she had ever been abroad, and Harvey had behaved like an asshole. Yes, there was no shame in calling her husband that in front of herself. He deserved it, but why should she suffer? Oh, he would have been happy if she had stayed in the room until morning, but to his shame, she wouldn't. Soon enough, Cindy stepped out of the shower and opened her closet. In general, her closet, even updated for the vacation, did not shine neither expensiveness nor variety. The girl for the first time so frankly thought about the fact that she all these years as it ignored the needs of many other women. For example, the need to dress beautifully, fashionably, to her own taste. She was an idiot, Cindy told herself. You really should have thought of that before. That if you want financial freedom, you have to be able to earn it yourself. Sighing at the years of marriage full of mistakes, Cindy took down the rack with the little black dress. She'd bought it for last New Year's Eve and had worn it out with her husband. It was a simple slip dress with an elegant boat neckline and a palm above the knee, with short sleeves that exposed her shoulders. After changing her clothes, the girl took a little mascara, a smoky pencil for a short arrow on her upper eyelids, and a transparent cherry-colored gloss on her lips. Cindy didn't normally wear heels, but she was going out, so she wore black shoes with a thin stiletto heel and a silver strap around her ankle. There wasn't much cash in her purse because they were on vacation and Harvey had said that his wife was a fool and would get screwed over, so he would pay for everything himself. But she had some change, and Cindy hoped it would be enough for one cocktail. Non-alcoholic, of course. Cindy never drank anything stronger than kefir. By the way, she annoyed her husband because their couple at the same New Year's Eve parties became the object of jokes. Going down in the elevator to the hotel lobby, Cindy remembered that she had forgotten her phrasebook, but she hoped that for sure in the cafes and in general around many people probably speak English quite well. It was the second main language of the country after the local language, which was an intricately woven linguistic heritage of French, Portuguese, as well as local dialects that had been spoken in the area before European colonization. When we were just about to go on the trip, Cindy, by the way, told her husband that she knew English well at school, she had his in it, and then she was fond of it, purely for herself on the internet, studying with free materials. But Harvey put her in her place and said that she was a provincial fool and not to embarrass him there. He said that he himself would communicate with everyone he needed to, and in a phrasebook. Actually, Harvey didn't know English. More precisely, he knew, as Cindy was tacitly convinced, at the level of how do you do, and no more. Leaving the hotel lobby, Cindy followed the stone-paved path through an alley of tall shrubs. The white and lendenza pink flowers, which did not close even at night, exuded a sweet, candy-like fragrance. "We're closed, miss." The waitress waved her hands guiltily as she greeted her late guest at the closed doors of the cafe, where Cindy had hoped to spend her time over a coconut cocktail she had selected from the menu, having browsed online while on her way here. Fish poisoning in one of the guests, we're checking the entire kitchen and the supplier. We're off today and tomorrow too. "Oh, that's how it is," sighed the girl. There was only one more restaurant on the territory of the hotel, but it was there, judging by the text message, her husband had a date with his mistress, and naturally, Cindy had no desire to run into them there by chance. Do you know if there's anything else nearby? A cafe or something?" "Of course," smiled the waitress. "Across the street is the Velvet Restaurant." Cindy shook her head. She couldn't afford a restaurant. The waitress didn't know about her financial difficulties, of course, but she realized that this was not the right place for her. So she named another restaurant, a karaoke club, and a nightclub on the beach, which was about 10 minutes away along the promenade. The last option seemed to Cindy to be the best. In general, it was absolutely not in her habit to go out for a walk alone. Without her husband, especially at night, she would never have allowed herself to do that before. Nor, of course, would Harvey. But now it was different. It was as if Cindy had received a golden ticket that allowed her to break the unwritten rules of behavior of a good wife. The entrance to the club was unexpectedly crowded. The security guard, a tall black guy, let people in without any hurry and turned some of them aside. The familiar word, face control, flashed through Cindy's mind, and she thought that against the background of the modeling data of the girls entering the club, she would definitely fail it. I didn't want to be embarrassed, but then the queue moved forward abruptly and a flock of young people poured into the club, and Cindy found herself right in front of the mighty guard. "Good evening," she smiled guiltily and was about to turn around because, well, this club. The room bar has sodas and juice, but then a slender, gothic-looking brunette came out of the club and waved her hand. "Cindy?" "Me." The girl jabbed her finger at herself. She was confused as to who could possibly know her. The name, of course, was pronounced a little garbled, but that was probably because the speaker was foreign. "Cindy, where the hell have you been?" repeated the brunette, already irritably impatient. "Let me through." She waved to the guard and he nodded, took Cindy under the elbow and led her, almost dragged her inside the club. "Excuse me, do we know each other?" She tried to clarify the situation, because she couldn't remember the gothic look on the girl's face at all. "No," she answered and confused the traveler completely. "They are waiting for you." "Me? Who?" Cindy wanted to understand what was going on here, but she didn't have time. She was grabbed under the arm again and dragged up the scarlet-carpeted staircase. Music was blaring, colored lights flashed in the darkness. The second floor of the club had a more private atmosphere. "Listen, how do you know my name?" "Shut up," the brunette grumbled. "That's it." She abruptly turned Cindy to her, grabbed her by the shoulders, and gave her a critical look. "I'll kill. One day, that's for sure. Although, there's something about the humble simpleton look." Another twist and a slight nudge in the back. Cindy almost lost her balance as she fell into the closed box. It was a private office, one side with a balcony overlooking the common area of the club. There were several men sitting on a sofa by a low table, but only one of them really caught Cindy's attention, and they locked gazes with him as she entered, swaying awkwardly on her heels. Blonde-haired, clearly not from around here, he was dressed in slacks, a white shirt and a purple vest. His whole look reminded Cindy of a jazz-era mafia movie she'd seen, and she had the stupid thought that this was what their man might look like. "Wow," said the bald guy sitting next to the blonde guy with a toothpick in his mouth. "You're just in time, baby." Cindy rounded her eyes. Now she was sure there had been a mistake, because she didn't know any of the four men. "Show some class, baby," exclaimed the other one in the wrinkled light-colored suit. who had clearly had more than enough to drink if you wanted to stay sane. And then he pulled out his wallet, took out a wad of bills, and waved them in the air, beckoning Cindy to him. "You're yummy." Something began to dawn on the girl. A crowd of men, she's alone. There is still an elevation near the table with drinks and appetizers that looks like a large bollard and a pole in the middle of it. It looks like they were waiting for the girl too. Cindy felt a blush of shame flood her face as she was mistaken for a stripper. But why? Was she dressed so shamelessly? Not really. Compared to many of the other girls in the club, she was modest. "I'm sorry, you're mistaken," she muttered, and felt sick at the absurdity of the situation, at the fact that her knowledge of English had eroded from her head, and now her situation, if she couldn't explain herself clearly, could become much worse. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm sorry, I have to go," she squeaked pitifully and rushed away. But another man, dressed in a black suit with a red tie, suddenly grabbed her across the waist and pulled her toward him. Cindy shrieked and fell on the couch, tried to fight back, but it only made things worse. Now she was lying with her belly across the knees of the guy who had caught her, and her nose was in the knees of the one who looked like a mobster. What a horror! "Dan, chill out," came the handsome, deep male voice above her. The next moment Cindy, floundering like a fawn barely learning to walk, was on her feet, supported by strong arms. "What's your name?" the blonde man asked sternly. Now that he stood up, it was clear that he was much taller than her husband, and to look him in the eyes you have to tilt your head. "Cindy. No, Cindy. There's been a mistake. I didn't come this way," I mumbled, trying to pull away, but he wouldn't let me. It was embarrassing, hurtful, and strangely hot around this man. "So, you're not?" I'm not dancing," exhaled Cindy. "Let me go, please." "Jake, what's going on?" the bald guy grumbled. "I know it's your night, but there's only one girl for everyone. Or do you want a private dance and we're screwed?" The blonde was about to answer something, but then in the VIP box entered a new-faced blonde with gorgeous forms in a tight scarlet, shiny dress and high platform shoes. "Boys, sorry we're late. Cindy will entertain you now. It's going to be hot," she chirped. "Cindy," the blonde turned to her. "Marco's dancer. Were you expecting someone else?" The blonde smiled, twirling a curl on her finger. "What's going on? Please let me go." Cindy was ready to cry. "Guys, have fun. I'll be right back." The man they called Jake waved to the men and led Cindy out of the VIP box. Behind the velvet drapes that closed behind them, a slow, sensual tune was played and cheers and whistles were heard. "Let me go at last," Cindy exclaimed. All right. Just calm down, okay?" The blonde raised his hands conciliatorily and even took a half step back. "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing." She folded her arms across her chest. She wanted to cover herself, not because she was cold, but to cover her shoulders, her neck, and all of herself from that piercing gaze. "If nothing had happened, you wouldn't be in this situation," Jake grinned. "It's just a name mix-up," the girl muttered. "Okay. Hey, where are you going?" When Cindy tried to sneak out again, now she was lying with her belly across the knees of the guy who had caught her, and her nose was in the knees of the one who looked like a mobster. What a horror! "Dan, chill out," came the handsome, deep male voice above her. The next moment Cindy, floundering like a fawn barely learning to walk, was on her feet, supported by strong arms. "What's your name?" the blonde man asked sternly. Now that he stood up, it was clear that he was much taller than her husband, and to look him in the eyes you have to tilt your head. Cindy. No, Cindy. There's been a mistake. I didn't come this way," I mumbled, trying to pull away, but he wouldn't let me. It was embarrassing, hurtful, and strangely hot around this man. "So, you're not?" I'm not dancing, exhaled Cindy. Let me go, please. Jake, what's going on? The bald guy grumbled. I know it's your night, but there's only one girl for everyone. Or do you want a private dance and we're screwed? The blonde was about to answer something, but then in the VIP box entered a new-faced blonde with gorgeous forms in a tight scarlet, shiny dress and high platform shoes. Boys, sorry we're late. Cindy will entertain you now. It's going to be hot, she chirped. Cindy, the blonde turned to her. Marco's dancer? Were you expecting someone else? The blonde smiled, twirling a curl on her finger. What's going on? Please let me go. Cindy was ready to cry. Guys, have fun. I'll be right back. The man they called Jake waved to the men and led Cindy out of the VIP box. Behind the velvet drapes that closed behind them, a slow, sensual tune was played and cheers and whistles were heard. Let me go at last, Cindy exclaimed. All right. Just calm down, okay? The blonde raised his hands conciliatorily and even took a half step back. What's wrong with you? Nothing. She folded her arms across her chest. She wanted to cover herself, not because she was cold, but to cover her shoulders, her neck, and all of herself from that piercing gaze. If nothing had happened, you wouldn't be in this situation, Jake grinned. It's just a name mix-up, the girl muttered. Okay, hey, where are you going? When Cindy tried to sneak out again, actually, I just picked a normal place to have a little talk, Jake said, and I didn't mean to. So you're the kind of woman who won't let you pay for yourself. What about without the subtext? It's not a date, really? I'm sorry, but I wouldn't be flattered if a woman fainted in front of me. Bowing her head low, Cindy nodded and stomped over next to her. How embarrassing. No, she wasn't the type to pay for herself. If only because it had been a long time since she'd had her own money and her spouse had paid everywhere. She'd heard about this place, fancy, impossibly expensive, and tables booked almost ahead of time. Mr. Wilson, welcome. The receptionist rushed up to them. At last you have honored us with your attention again. You and your lovely companion. The receptionist gave a second-half bow to Cindy, and she gawked. I guess this Jake guy is famous around here. A table where it's quieter, the blonde man threw in. Yes, of course. Would you like a view of the harbor? Jake nodded. They were escorted to a table by the window. It was elegantly set with a fancy, ornate arrangement of live oil. He was born in Alaska. His father was a motorboat repairman, and his mother was a school nurse. Jake graduated from Harvard. Becoming a lawyer specializing in international law, he began to build a career in one of the firms in New York, but then on vacation decided to visit these islands and just fell in love with the tropical flavor of local life. He decided to try to find a job here, and he found one. And now for 3 years he has been here, slowly combining, in fact, endless vacation and career. Sounds like a fairy tale, Cindy smiled. From the outside, Jake nodded. But in reality, sometimes I don't leave the office for a week. Today was my day off, and I blew it. Friends can wait, but a damsel in distress can't. I'm not a damsel in distress. Well, then what are we doing here? And by the way, what are you going to do next? We're flying back in 10 days. Do you have a good divorce lawyer? What? I didn't think. Cindy swallowed hard. About divorce. Do you love him? It was a very simple question, and yet unbearably difficult, and even more so when it came from a man she had met under such strange circumstances. It's very personal, Cindy replied. Thank you for buying me dinner. Will you let me walk you out? Cindy nodded. Can I have your number? Don't take this the wrong way, but I think we should still talk about everything. Cindy dictated the number. Everything she had experienced in the last couple of hours was starting to feel like a dream. Too many emotions and not the most pleasant ones. And then, Suddenly, like in a movie, a mysterious stranger gives her a helping hand. Jake paid the bill and walked out of the restaurant. He led her to a car, and although Cindy didn't know the make of the car, she realized it was something very expensive. Said to bring it up from the club parking lot, he explained, opening the front passenger door in front of her. "Buckle up." He threw her a stern look, since Cindy didn't do it right away. The fine for not wearing a belt on a passenger is $2,000 plus 12 hours of community service. The passenger pays. The local government is very sensitive to safety issues, and all the deaths that have occurred on the island are believed to attract bad luck to these lands. So they warn them as best they can. Cindy hummed and hurried to buckle herself in. She was glad in her mind that Harvey wasn't going to rent a car here. He had a habit of not wearing his seatbelt and called his wife a coward if she remembered to do so. As they drove up to the hotel, Cindy thought about what would happen if her husband saw her with another man. She'd never given him any such reason until this evening. But when they'd said goodbye to Jake, when she'd gone up to her floor and entered the room, empty as expected, she suddenly realized that it would probably give her a prickly, vindictive pleasure. And then Cindy just wanted to sleep, the dense dinner, and the generally tired body, for which the long flight had only ended the previous morning. She fell asleep as soon as her head What? He gave her a strange look. "It's okay, don't start," and he shrugged his shoulders, dropping her hand. Cindy thought with irritation that her husband always managed to ruin every good thing they'd done that seemed to bring their family closer together. And then, involuntarily, it was as if someone had forced into her head the idea that a little trip to a tropical paradise with Jake would have been different. Lucky someone. Sighed Cindy silently about the blonde lover, which of course he already has. Well, all will appear soon. Such men do not stay on the beach for long. Finally, they returned to the beach. The guide offered everyone snacks and soft drinks seized in advance from the main island and waiting for tourists in cooler bags on the boat. The guide caught the hand of an elderly lady, I think she was from Germany, when she wanted to pick up a pebble from the beach as a souvenir. From his hurried speech, Cindy realized that it was forbidden to take the pebbles out of here specifically, doubly threatened with some draconian fine. The German tourist frightenedly returned the stones to their place in the surf. Finally, it was time to go back. What happened? The same German lady got excited as the boat approached the pier where it had originally left. "I returned those stones." "I don't think that's on you," Cindy reassured her. "Well, it's not for all of us. Something serious must have happened." The thing was, there were people on the beach. Cindy didn't know much about it, but they seemed to be local authorities, like the police. The girl opened her eyes and Jake was among them. He was dressed in uniform pants, short safari-style boots, and a beige short-sleeved shirt with some kind of colorful patches. When the boat docked, one of the local law enforcement officers looked into it and quickly spoke to the guide about something. He turned white and turned to his fellow travelers and translated the orders into English. "I need you all to hand over your backpacks and bags. It won't take long. Right now, please." A disgruntled murmur spread through the company of vacationers. "What the hell is this?" Harvey frowned. "They don't have the right." Cindy, who had already handed over her light cotton backpack, in which she carried water, bug spray, and other necessities, smiled reassuringly at him. "Honey, don't worry. It's just a formality. Why should it be?" Harvey snapped at her and averted his eyes. "Translate that, please." The guide turned to Cindy. "The National Park Rangers have learned that there are poachers on Pirate Island. The island is closed to the public as of today. We were the last ones to arrive. They are checking everyone returning from it. It is suspected that the poachers want to pass something through tourists, because visitors to the country are traditionally treated with great trust." Cindy patiently relayed the words to her husband. Harvey continued to frown, but finally held out the backpack. The mustachioed elderly ranger took it and opened it. All the campers except Cindy and her husband were up, but they were still crowded around the backpack, curious to see how it would end. Someone suggested that maybe even the boat would be checked. What if the guide had taken something out? Cindy waited patiently. She was getting a headache again, either from the full blazing sun or from her husband. She didn't immediately realize what was happening next. Just suddenly, the ranger took out a box from her husband's backpack, then another one. He opened it and took out something small, like a toy. One of the tourists, who could see everything better, gasped. "Get out of the boat," the guide said quietly, and looked at Cindy and Harvey with horror, but also with reproach. "But what? I don't understand." The girl looked back at her spouse. Harvey. Mrs. Jake, who had been silent and standing to the side, suddenly turned to her. He was holding out his hand to her now, offering to help her to the shore, but his eyes were cold. Cindy accepted the outstretched hand. Harvey came up next. Now everything could be seen clearly. Some man dressed like a hospital doctor took what looked like a toy, felt it, and ordered another ranger to do something to a very young boy. He rushed to a nearby car and brought a suitcase with a cross on it. Cindy now realized what she was seeing was small, furry monkeys being pulled out of boxes. The tiny creatures were hanging in the hands of the ranger and veterinarian like rags. Cindy shuddered as to how these had gotten into her husband's backpack. Really? The vet was doing something to cover the animal's face with an oxygen mask, something to put into its mouth from a vial. Suddenly, the animal twitched and squeaked. The veterinarian gently intercepted the monkey and put it in the cage brought after the first animal aid suitcase. One of the tourists applauded the rescue of the animals, but in general, everyone was quiet. "Mister, you'll have to come with us," Jake said to Harvey. "It's not mine," he replied, his eyes rounding. "I don't know how it got there." "Mister, you have to come with us," Jake repeated with pressure and turned to Cindy. "Translate to this man, Mrs., that we just want to get to the bottom of this." Cindy spent the next few hours, after her husband, of course, had to get into the ranger's car and drive to their office, in a fog. She didn't see Harvey, who was talking to him, in a separate room somewhere. And she was sitting in what appeared to be the reception area. And she couldn't accept reality. Yes, her husband wasn't perfect, but to believe that he would do such a thing was just impossible. "Mrs. Douglas," Jake called her by her husband's last name, "we need to talk. Would you be so kind as to come with me?" The girl nodded and stood up. She followed the blonde man into the office, and judging by its size and the fact that he sat at the desk with no one else there, she assumed he was some kind of boss. "So, I want to hear your side of the story." Jake switched to a more familiar style of speech. "I don't know what happened," the girl said. "We were just on a field trip, and Harvey took it this morning. He didn't even ask me. We were walking with the guide all." Cindy blinked, feeling like crying. And then, "I don't know. Harvey would never." "Your husband took part in smuggling an endemic species of marmoset." Jake leaned back in his chair, folded his arms across his chest, and gave the girl across from him a mocking, icy stare. "I doubt they took the sleeping pills themselves, lay in the boxes, and dropped into his backpack like ripe coconuts." Cindy didn't recognize him. The man who was in front of her now looked nothing like the man who had taken care of her so unexpectedly and warmly yesterday. And it was certainly not because he had taken her to a restaurant for nothing, but he had shown ordinary human participation. He had listened to her. He wasn't indifferent. "You don't think..." This sudden realization was frightening and insulting at the same time. "That I'm in on this too?" Jake said, and smiled. "That's an interesting idea. Actually, I had that theory. I even wondered if our meeting yesterday wasn't a coincidence. But on the other hand, you didn't ask me anything about the operation of our parks. You didn't try in any way to gain my special favor." At his last words, Cindy felt her cheeks flush again. "So I think, given what you've been saying about your husband, Maybe you had nothing to do with it." "Of course I had nothing to do with it," Cindy exclaimed. "I didn't even know we were going to this island." "Your husband didn't buy the tour, by the way. He was given 2 tickets. A woman named Sarah. You know her?" "Yeah," Cindy nodded. She's my husband's mistress. She originally wanted to go to the island herself with someone local. We even suspect with whom. You see, imperial green-eared marmosets are very expensive on the black market. They're caught, put to sleep, packaged like you saw, and tried to smuggle them across the border. More than half, if not 70%, of the animals are killed, but the income from the sale of the rest is enough to cover all the costs and risks. Apparently, Sarah was chosen at random as soon as she arrived on the island. Sometimes the locals, businessmen, work with tourists. It's awful, Cindy said. Harvey, he's been having trouble with money lately, she added deafeningly. Sarah seems to have been scared to go into the business herself. We know for a fact that the man who was supposed to accompany her backed out at the last minute and ordered her to take the monkeys alone. And she, just like that, decided to entrust it to a man who was tempted by the alleged ease of the adventure and the generous reward. Unfortunately, we have already had a similar experience. The airport security service missed the export of several species of butterflies. They were in the caterpillar stage, as well as lizards. In the near future, by the way, we expect to catch poachers. They have been on the island supposedly for 3 months and are simply afraid to return, as they do not know which of the owners of boats carrying tourists can still be trusted. "What will happen to my husband?" asked Cindy. "I don't know," shrugged Jake. "What do you mean?" The girl got up from the table. "I thought you said you had very strict laws. He's a foreigner. You wouldn't dare. Actually, these very marmosets are on the coat of arms of our ruler. He'll be furious. He'll want to, say, punish someone who's insulted his country." "No." Cindy shook her head. "There must be something we can do." "I don't know." "Please." Jake turned away, looking out the window. Last night he was just going to relax with his friends at the club after a busy week. Then this strange tourist practically fell on their heads. Jake couldn't explain the reasons for his own behavior. He just wanted to help this girl, to comfort her, to protect her. He hadn't tried to impress her, and he'd taken her to the restaurant because it was close to the club and had good food. He hadn't tried to seduce her. Only later, when he returned to his apartment in the morning, he thought about the fact that it was unusual for him. After all, it seemed that if he showed a little more persistence, she could be with such a nasty, as she said, her husband, at least a couple of kisses to give. And the girl had been on Jake's mind ever since. And now it was so that he began to make an additional plan to get his own. Jake's good education and natural acumen helped him build a brilliant career in a place where foreigners were treated with a duality of endless hospitality and wariness at the same time. At first, he was a visiting consultant on international law, which was important because the water borders of the small island nation were claimed by many. Then he was offered a permanent position in the National Park Service, of which there were 4, scattered over 4 islands out of the dozen that make up the country. 2 years ago, as a lawyer, Jake had been involved in a successful case in which a neighboring country had paid a large compensation for trespassing by its fishing trawlers, causing great damage to coral reefs. The sole ruler of the island country, who held the title of king like his father and his grandfather before him, had noticed the success of a foreigner so zealous for the natural well-being of the area. And he offered Jake not only a promotion, but also a lot of privileges, as well as simplified citizenship, while other foreigners could get it only for generous investments, for example, for starting a business that would provide jobs for the local population and taxes for the local budget. And now the woman sitting in front of him seemed to be begging him to do anything to save her husband. Jake grinned. The gray-eyed tourist was charming, but not enough to get everything from him just like that. "I can talk to someone," he said as if he didn't care at all. Maybe your husband will just get off with a fine and being put on some list. What list? Cindy didn't understand. The list that could deny him a visa to neighboring island countries, for example. And that's it. The girl was relieved. This is the first vacation we've taken in years. I don't think it's such a big loss. The fine will be $50,000, Jake added, watching the girl's reaction carefully. Plus your husband will be flogged in the main square. Along with his mistress. She's under arrest, too. What? Cindy now thought her heart might stop on the spot. She couldn't call her husband perfect. She couldn't say Harvey was the man of her life or her favorite person in the world. But still, he was her husband, her family man. And at the thought of what could be done to him, and that money, they could never raise that much money from friends and acquaintances. So what do we do? Sell the apartment? It seemed to Cindy that all the air was gone from the room. She raised her hand, pressed it to her neck, rubbed it nervously and sighed convulsively. A moment and Jake was sent a pleading look. Please, isn't there anything we can do? We don't have that kind of money and you said you were a lawyer. Isn't there anything you can do? No, you can't. What do you mean you can't do it? It's not gonna happen. Charming panic. The blonde grinned and squinted. What do you expect me to do? Go to the governor and tell him to forgive the smuggler because his wife needs it. And by the way, why is this so important to you? Isn't this all just retribution for treason? Anybody else in your position would be jumping for joy. Of course, paying the fine is bad enough. It's bad for your well-being too. Cindy was in a foggy haze. She saw Jake in front of her and saw him as her last Cindy. Please shook her head. Tears rolled down the girl's cheeks. Please, just something. I want to see my husband. Don't I have the right to do that? You know, I've already done something. I've talked to someone and assured them that you had nothing to do with it. You like animals, don't you? Yeah, Cindy nodded. I would never. I believe you. And I'm really sorry that our acquaintance took place and continued under these circumstances. But you know what? Rising, Jake walked around the table and stopped in front of Cindy. A step away from her. A hard look in his eyes, a slightly lowered tone. I'll see what else I can do. Let's meet tonight and talk about it, okay? Here, he quickly wrote something on a piece of paper torn from a notebook. Come to this address at 10 o'clock tonight. And don't talk to the press, it'll be worse for you. The hours to the evening passed swiftly and yet painfully slowly. Cindy spent the rest of the time in her room. She was knocked on twice. Once when she ordered room service, and the second time when the porter told her that a member of the press wanted to speak to her. But she naturally refused. In the evening, Cindy called a cab and gave her an address. It turned out to be a residential complex in the center of the city, and judging by the serious security at the entrance and the appearance of the building, it was an elite one. The girl was stopped in the lobby and asked who she was, and then nodded, letting her in, clearly alerted to her arrival. Cindy consoled and encouraged herself Jake would definitely help. How could a man who had been so generous and friendly the first time they met do otherwise? He had been rude during the day. He was just on duty, worried about the monkeys. Stepping off the elevator, Cindy stopped at the correct suite number and pressed the bell button. A moment later, the door opened. Jake smiled at her. Come in. Cindy looked around the apartment without much curiosity. Stone walls, leather furniture, lots of gray shades. It looked expensive, stylish, but it was cold, uncomfortable. Can I pour you a drink? A man asked, walking to the bar. I don't drink, not at all, I replied. Too bad. He grinned and poured himself some wine. Cindy sighed. She thought it was better not to talk about something so serious, something that was about to happen, not under alcohol. Sit down, he pointed to the couch. The girl obediently lowered herself onto it. She put her purse on the coffee table with a glass top and folded her hands in her lap. I wanted to ask what he could do, but I choked on my words because Jake was suddenly very close. His hands slid down the back of the couch so that he was, in effect, putting his arm around the girl. Tell me, how did you two meet? What did he win you over with? Cindy thought it was rude to demand answers right away, so she decided it was okay to tell him a little more about herself. You're such a silly girl, Jake grinned, setting down his glass of wine. You're very pretty, aren't you? You could have found someone better. At least not after he took you. What are you talking about? Cindy frowned. I mean, you think I should have looked for another man after Harvey did so much for me? This practical, yet extremely cynical suggestion of how things could have been better for her angered the girl to the core. I'm just saying that a smart woman always knows how to find what's best for her, he shrugged. I just can't understand how you still love that guy. But, well, I guess there's something you can do in your case. The thing is that before the punishment, he will have to be examined by a doctor, and he may find out that your husband, for example, has a heart problem. Does he have that? Actually, he's healthy, Cindy thought, remembering. In such a case, the doctor can still say that it is impossible to punish the ruler, does not need that. Instead of a show flogging, there was an execution with the death of a tourist. It would be such a scandal, would spoil the image of the country. Cindy didn't say that such an execution was hardly good for the country's image. Right now, she clung to Jake's option with all her strength, all her hope. Can you do it? She asked, reaching out and grabbing his hand. Maybe, he said thoughtfully, and covered her slender, cold fingers with his hand, lightly stroking them. As for the fine, in principle, you could borrow it, and then, when it works out, you could pay it back. But I have no acquaintance who could so easily borrow $50,000 and wait. I can. What? She froze, frozen, looking at Jake. His words should have been encouraging, reassuring, but along with that, Cindy began to realize something, or rather, she began to have some suspicions. Jake was so close. He had met her here at his place and late last night. The only question was, he was so close that she could feel his hot breath on her face. What are you willing to do to save your husband? Cindy felt like she'd been split in two. One was horrified at what an abomination, what a dirty deal she was being offered. But on the other side of the scale was her Harvey. And the other part of the girl, the more subconscious part, was crushed by the bitter realization that behind the attractive mask of this man was just a monster. Just a low man who had found a way to satisfy his desires no matter what. Against all odds, Cindy exhaled and moved forward, drawing Jake into the kiss. This night she tried not to meet his gaze because it hurt too much. This night she was just doing everything she could to save her husband. And she hoped she wouldn't be deceived. A week later it was reported that 2 poachers had been captured on Pirate Island. In all those days, Cindy met with Jake many times, and not just for small talk. "Excuse me, Cindy Douglas?" A voice behind her made her flinch. Cindy was out for a stroll, just to walk the streets, maybe sit on the beach for a while. She was unfamiliar with this woman in her 40s, short haircut, red-haired, light scarf over her head, eyes hidden behind dark glasses as if to protect her from the sun. But for some reason it seemed to be a kind of disguise. "You don't know me," the stranger smiled. "My name is Anna Colon. I'm a journalist." "Oh no." Cindy waved her arms and not very politely elbowed her way out of the crowd at the souvenir shop. "No interviews." "No, you misunderstood me." A member of the press came rushing after her. "I'm sorry for scaring you. I'm not here to question you about what happened to your husband. I want to help. I don't think you can help me." "You never know." Anna looked around. "Why don't we sit down? We really need to talk. I need to warn you about Jake." The mention of the man who essentially held her husband's fate in his hands made Cindy give up running. The girl tensed up, looked around too, not realizing anyone might be following them. She finally agreed. They sat down at a plastic table in a simple cafe, ordered a glass of lemonade. "So, what do you want?" Cindy said, tapping her sneaker nervously on the sidewalk. "I know you've been seeing Jake Wilson lately. He's working on a case my husband's involved in. You've been meeting informally. You go to his house. Is that how Rangers do business now?" Cindy, flushed with shame, turned away. "It's none of your business. Jake Wilson is one of the most corrupt officials in this city and this country. He skims the cream off everything he can get his hands on. He's got the power, and he's good at pulling the strings." "I don't know what you're talking about." Cindy wanted to jump up, put her hands over her ears and run away. She'd already realized that Jake wasn't one of the good guys, but actually, she didn't care what was going on, just as long as she could get Harvey out, just as long as she could get home. As far as the universe was concerned, she'd never go on another trip overseas again in her life. "You are in a difficult situation, and it is not for me to judge a woman who is trying to save her husband," Anna said. "All I know is that this could end badly. Are you sure Jake will keep his promises?" "I'm not." Anna was having trouble breathing again. She drained the glass of lemonade, but she felt neither the taste nor the refreshing satisfaction. "I don't know. I want to save my husband. What about having, shall we say, a backup? A leverage against a man who, you realize, doesn't have a penny of conscience? Wouldn't you like to help other people? Those who might still be victimized by him in the future? Bribes, blackmail. Believe me, this man has achieved a lot, and he's not going to stop. They say he's a dictator. Oh, I misspoke. The local ruler is willing to give him the daughter of one of his concubines, which will certainly add to Jake's influence. But we, you and I, can stop it all." "I don't understand you." Cindy shook her head. She could believe what she was hearing, but the journalist's confidence that they could change everything seemed absurd. What could two women, and even foreigners, do here? Anna just held it out to her, showing her an ID card from some French magazine. "Just listen to me," Anna said. "Then, of course, you can think about it. Just understand that we don't have much time and you, as a brave woman, can influence a lot of things." Cindy listened to her unexpected ally. What she was proposing seemed insane, but there was no alternative. Cindy agreed. Anna clearly explained to her what had to be done and made her repeat the whole plan 100 times. Everything was to take place at the last meeting with Jake. The next day, the ruler of the country was to decide personally what would be the fate of the tourists who had sullied themselves by their ungrateful attitude to the tropical land that had welcomed them. That evening and part of the night Cindy spent at Jake's apartment. She chose the moment when he went to pick up a dinner delivered from the restaurant, which she had no appetite for. And when he returned, she spoke. She called him by name and found occasion to mention his surname. She said that she was grateful to him for using his power to trick her into saving her husband. She also said that she realized he had, in fact, forced her. But did she have a way out, a way to refuse such a powerful man? Cindy tried to get Jake to talk about what else he was doing, in terms of how he was still breaking the rules of the country where he was building his career so successfully. But he soon got bored of her chatter. The girl left as usual in the early morning and returned to the hotel by cab. The local ruler, a heavy, stunted man whose appearance was a bizarre combination of European costume and local traditional jewelry, replete with gold and precious stones, including a crown and rings, made a heartfelt speech on local television that he was happy that at last another corner of nature was cleared of criminals. He also announced that from now on the country will have to intensify its conservation measures due to the immoral behavior of the two tourists who had been so warmly welcomed. The governor said that Sarah had escaped the lashes because she was a woman, and Harvey would not be punished because he had a weak heart. The fine, however, was not waived for Sarah, and she was to remain on the island until she could find the means to do so. And for Harvey, the fine was paid and he could leave the country, and he had to. "Hi," Cindy said to her husband. From the moment they got off the boat, they met. In just an hour, the couple would be taken under guard to the airport to be officially escorted out of the country, so to speak. But now there was one more formality. Cindy and Harvey had to appear in person before the ruler of the island, and they had to kneel down and formally apologize. Each of them had been met in advance by a man from the palace, who had taught them the ritual phrases of apology in the local language, which, by the way, were not so difficult to memorize. Anna warned Cindy that everything would take place behind the closed doors of the ceremonial hall, where only the ruler and his guards would be present. She assured her that this was the perfect and only possible moment to carry out the plan. Cindy's tears came to her eyes and her heart ached when she saw her husband. She wanted to rush over to him. He was there, he was all right, but she, even though he had cheated on her willingly and openly, she felt that she had no right to do so. It was like she was dirty. Harvey gustily embraced his wife. "My darling." He was naturally unaware of the way he had gotten his freedom, and Cindy had sworn to keep that secret to herself forever. "It's all right. I'll be home soon." "What the hell are those bastards up to?" He frowned, speaking in a low voice and glancing at the guards around him. "Quiet, please." Cindy was afraid that something would happen for saying that. "Please, just say what you've memorized." Finally, the tall gilded doors swung open before them. But stepping over the threshold, Cindy almost shrieked because at the right hand of the ruler stood Jake. What is he doing here? Anna had said that the ceremonial protocol excluded any outsiders. Wasn't this a sign of fate to back off? But when she looked at Jake's face and saw the sneer on it, the contempt for her husband, and probably for her as well, she changed her mind. No, she would do it right, and then watch some more as he would be so strong and all-powerful. Cindy hadn't thought about what the ruler would do to a man who, in fact, for his own purposes, took dirty advantage of power and trust. But it would definitely be something bad, and she didn't feel sorry for Jake, not one bit. She and her husband walked to the throne and knelt before it. They lowered their heads and said a few phrases. Yes, it was a little clumsy, but foreigners are forgiven. Now they were supposed to stand up and walk out without looking up. Cindy took a deep breath. It was time. It was now or never. "Your Majesty, pardon me and let me speak." The guards reacted instantly, alerted and surrounded in a tight ring. In general, some of the guards of the ruler were modern, and some were as if they came from the Middle Ages, in national long motley suits, with curved swords on their belts and with spears decorated with feathers. "What are you doing?" The husband stared at the girl in shock and incomprehension. "We've been released already. I'm doing what I have to do, trust me." Cindy told him and turned back to the island's ruler. "I have something very important to tell you. It's about the safety of your power." The ruler frowned and gestured for the guards to stand down. "What do you want? Can we talk in private?" Cindy pleaded with him. "I swear, what I have to say is very important." "What's going on? What are you talking about?" Harvey panicked. His wife was speaking to the governor in English, and he, not understanding a word, was just afraid she'd say too much. They'd be punished again, somehow in this wild country. Jake leaned toward the king and whispered something to him. Cindy's heart sank uneasily, and nothing would work. But then the king made another gesture to the servant, and he said something to the servant, who scurried away. "You are allowed to speak," said the island master to Cindy, "but you will speak to me and in front of my counselor. Mr. Wilson has done much for the welfare of the island. I have no secrets from him." Cindy nodded. Maybe that's even better. He wouldn't understand a word of it, of course, but she could explain it to him later. And in general, she would be able to tell only part of the truth. Another person came into the room, a woman in a purple suit. You will speak in front of your husband. What the wife says should not be a secret to the husband. It is the will of the gods, said the ruler sternly. I know that he speaks neither the language of my people nor the English that you and I understand. Every word will be translated with her help. He nodded at the woman in the suit. She is a good translator and speaks yours among other languages. Speak. Cindy broke into a cold sweat. No. It would be revealed to her husband now. It was. She wasn't prepared for this at all. But it was too late to back down. Holding herself from a shattering tantrum with the mere thought that it would destroy Jake, she pulled her cell phone out of her purse and held it out to the ruler. Your Majesty, here is a recording of my conversation with your counselor. Please turn it on now. The governor raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Jake gritted his teeth, turned white, and sent Cindy a searing glare. The girl was afraid he might try to knock the phone out of the king's hands altogether, to stop him somehow. But he didn't act. Didn't expect this? The bastard. Did he realize it was all over for him? The king said something to a servant who handed him and the interpreter headphones. Cindy understood why he wanted to listen in the original, and the guest specialist needed them to do simultaneous translation for her husband without interrupting one sound. What a nightmare. Harvey was about to open his mouth to demand an explanation, but then he just listened. Cindy wasn't looking at anyone. She was staring at the floor. It was unbearable. The girl cautiously took a step, another step away from her husband. He will forgive her, won't he? She thought, and it seemed so strange to want to cry, and at the same time as if there were no tears. Oh, you bitch, bellowed her husband as the tape ended. Cindy shrieked, but her husband, who rushed to her, was held back by the guards who crossed his path with spade sticks. With her husband alive, she's going to another man's bunk. Harvey, I was saving you, Cindy exclaimed. Didn't you hear me? I heard that you told him. Harvey shook his hand and pointed at Jake. You sang about what a man he was and how good it was for you. Cindy stepped toward her husband, not afraid of him at all. I'm sorry, I just wanted tow. Mrs. Douglas. The king's voice was menacing. Rising from his throne, he confidently, stamping his step, approached the tourists. Just because you gave me this tape. What did you expect? The king's face suddenly broke into a smile. Cindy blinked incomprehensibly. You found out that your counselor and the man you gave power to. Jake Wilson is a loyal man, said the governor. I value him, and his personal life is on his conscience. Personal life? Cindy couldn't believe what she was hearing. He told the doctor to forge my husband's health certificate. He's taking bribes. He swindled poachers' boats off the coral reefs. And for the latter we are immensely grateful to him. The governor grinned. It has supported the treasury considerably. And bribery. Well, it's certainly not the best way to do business, but his other virtues more than cover it. As for you obviously didn't come up with this on your own, did you? Not long ago, you were seen with a hotshot journalist, Anna Colon. I suppose it was her idea. It's all right, the secret police are already on it. You're the king. You're supposed to protect justice. They call you the leopard in gold, the 1,000-year guardian of the island. Cindy couldn't believe it was real. You foreigners are so fond of prying. The king shook his head. Sometimes I think opening up the country was a bad idea in the first place. But you, Mrs. Douglas, are forgiven. Jake has some sympathy for you, and so I forgive your impertinence. As for you, the governor approached the counselor and gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder. You should be more careful. Perhaps marriage will be good for you. And deal with Anna. She and her colleagues have too much to offer. I'd bow to your will, my king. Jake bowed. He stepped down from the throne and approached Cindy. I thought you were smarter than that. Were we so bad together that you decided to betray us? Perhaps, He suddenly grasped her chin with one hand and her waist with the other and pulled her toward him. "Your husband doesn't think you're a fool for nothing." When he said that, he kissed her lips. Farewell, passionate, even desperate, but without a shadow of tenderness. He let her go. "Escort these tourists to the airport and be polite. We respect visitors to the island, even if they don't pay us the same," Jake said. Cindy walked out of the palace as if in a fog. She was not well aware of what was going on around her. The car she and her husband sat in the back seat, but they didn't even look at each other. The airport. Here, they began to stare at them. Journalists clicked cameras. The accompanying guards hurriedly took the spouses to one of the luxury lounges until the time of their departure, freed from outsiders. Finally, boarding was announced. "Harvey." Cindy turned to her husband as the plane gained altitude and the islands and ocean began to look like a blurred watercolor. Her husband didn't answer. He turned away toward the aisle between the seats. In the past, when they fought, Harvey usually talked a lot. Then he would just walk away, as he explained once, to get some air. But never had he been so silent. "Can I have a glass of juice?" "Apple, if you have it," Cindy asked the stewardess, who had just shown up at their row with a table on wheels. "Yes, please. How was your vacation?" Tropical islands are unforgettable, aren't they? With a sincere smile, designed to prolong the aftertaste of a marvelous tourist trip, the stewardess turned to her, filling a glass and handing her a drink. "Yes, it's one you won't forget," Cindy replied. There must have been something in her gaze, after which the stewardess somehow got cold feet and realized that it was not necessary to get involved with people who had problems. The plane landed for a connection in London, then flew home. At the airport of her hometown, Cindy was worried about how quickly the news about what had happened could become known to her family. In general, of course, all they can find out is that Harvey was caught as a smuggler, nothing more. But they'll know for sure, even if it doesn't make it on TV. The story could be revealed on the internet. Plus, Sarah is left on the islands and unfortunately, she and their family have mutual acquaintances. "Harvey, we need to talk," Cindy ventured once more to her own man. "There's nothing to talk about," he muttered. "Leave me alone." He waved her off. "We live as we used to live." But living as before, of course, did not work out. Harvey's colleagues at work were the first to know about it, because Sarah never came back from vacation. The fuss began. Almost immediately, all of the Douglas entourage learned about what Harvey had done. His parents had a heart condition, and it was all true. Cindy, no matter how she felt about her husband, had been on good terms with his father and mother during their marriage and sympathized with them sincerely. Naturally, she and her husband had questions about how they got out. Cindy stubbornly repeated yes, her husband had health problems. Yes, the fine was paid by local charitable organizations, but they asked not to be identified so they wouldn't be flooded with requests. It was about 2 weeks after her return when it became known that Sarah had paid about a third of the fine and was finally released from the island with the obligation to continue paying. She was fired from her job, and although the chief told everyone that she had simply stopped coping with her duties, his true opinion was also known. He didn't want to have a person on his staff who was involved in such a serious illegal case. Cindy and Harvey hardly spoke. All their communication was limited to the essentials. They no longer slept together. Her husband began to make his own bed in the hall. Cindy tried several more times to talk to him about everything that had happened. After all, it couldn't go on like this forever. But he waved it off, said he had to think. And then, 3 months after his return, he simply said he was filing for divorce. "I can't do this," he said, looking into Cindy's eyes. "You know, I can't do it. Yeah, I cheated on you myself. It's like I'm crazy. But you, and I was just trying to save you." The girl grinned bitterly. "And still, you shouldn't have done that. You betrayed me by lying with someone else." Her husband threw angrily. "Pack your things. Rent an apartment for yourself or something. We do not share property is not much, only the savings account. I'm a fool. I should have kept the money with my parents. I'm not asking for anything, Cindy replied. I'm not offering you anything, Harvey said. There's not much there anyway. Enough to get you back to your hole. Or are you going to stay here in town? You'll find someone. You're experienced now. Did you really like it with him that much? Cindy's hand flew up and landed on the man's cheek. Harvey groaned and stared at her incomprehensibly. There had been a lot of bad blood between the couple, but he'd never laid a hand on his wife. Don't you ever talk to me like that again, Cindy said. She was calm outwardly, and inwardly. She was no longer tormented by the pain of betrayal or resentment or anything. It was as if everything inside had burned out. And what I will do, how to live on, is not your concern. When the divorce was finalized, the girl packed her things. It turned out there wasn't much of it. Cindy didn't deny her pride, but she realized how stupid it would be to leave her husband's house with nothing at all, so she accepted the amount she was entitled to from the account where her husband saved from each paycheck. In addition, Cindy realized it was a fair, albeit insufficient, compensation for agreeing to sell her own apartment early in the marriage. She had rented an apartment in the same city, a small studio in a bedroom community. Few mutual acquaintances understood this breakup, because before that they seemed to be a perfect couple. Many former mutual friends stopped talking to Cindy, and she was not surprised because they had considered her a shadow for so long, a kind of an appendix to Harvey. The amount in the account was enough to live without worrying about finding an income for about 4 or 5 months, but Cindy decided that it was more reasonable to save more money. Naturally, her lack of education and work experience didn't make her attractive at job interviews, and a couple of places pointed her out the door after the HR department asked her how her family's reputation was. No priors. Cindy was confused. She answered honestly, yes, there was a story with the ex-husband. I'm sorry, said Cindy, squeamishly, to the human resources manager at the store where she was applying for a sales job. But we don't need that kind of people. This is a decent place. But eventually she got a job in a small bakery near her home, and on weekends she began to attend courses to become, as she had wanted once, now it seemed 100 years ago, a master of nail service. The new craft was not easy, but a year later, Cindy was already working in a salon and had her own regular clients who appreciated her signature style of nail design. But the girl was not discouraged. For the first time she felt so free. She tried not to think about her past. Sometimes she even thought that it would not be bad, as it happens in the movies, to get amnesia. Then, perhaps, the nightmares would stop tormenting her, in which Cindy dreamed of a jungle in flames, from which she had to rescue herself and carry a whole bunch of marmoset monkeys. "My me soon to the sea will take me to the sea," once shared with her joy one of the clients. "Anniversary, we have a daughter, there, went to the institute. Well, decided to treat themselves." And then the client named the very islands where Cindy had been. The girl shuddered and almost ruined the client's nail painting. "And you were there?" She didn't even notice the change of mood of the masters, so immersed in her own anticipation of the vacation. "Yes, once," Cindy smiled politely. "How was it?" The client fidgeted impatiently. "They say it's magical, and a real king rules there. It's exotic. I wish I could see everything up close. Believe me, not everything is as beautiful as it seems," sighed Cindy. "Well," the client sighed and pouted. "You're just saying that because you probably got a bad tour operator and the wrong hotel." Another year and a half passed. Cindy was making great progress. Gradually, she began to understand not only how to care for her nails, but also how to perfectly care for the skin on her hands and rejuvenate it. Salon owner Sabrina took notice of the hard-working, talented employee. And one day, she called Cindy in for a serious talk. It turned out that she was going to open a second salon, and needed an administrator. It was a bright prospect. Cindy only feared that her husband's past might get in the way. So she told her honestly that Harvey had been involved in poaching on a remote island, but she hadn't been personally accused of anything. "I don't care about that," Sabrina said. "You're very talented. I don't care what your ex-husband was up to." After her new position, Cindy's life changed for the better, and soon she decided to take out a mortgage and move out of her rented apartment. Now, if the weather was nice, she liked to go out on the balcony of her new little apartment and have a cup of coffee, watching the dawn splendidly coloring the city that was just beginning to awaken. "Have you forgotten your husband?" A former relative, whom Cindy called periodically, once asked her. "What are you talking about? We've been strangers for a long time." "It's just that," the relative mumbled, but then she continued. "Harvey and I got together. He fell in love, and she tricked him. Well, she tricked him for money. He got depressed. They broke up, and he keeps thinking about you. He says you are special, and he didn't appreciate you. Anyway, maybe you should try again, after all these years of marriage." "No," Cindy said. "We're never gonna be together again. And we probably never should have gotten together in the first place." "You're weird," the relative ranted. "Harvey's a great guy. Hard-working, no bad habits. He won't be alone for long, you know." "You know," Cindy sighed. "I gotta go. I've got things to do," and she hung up. She had no doubt in her mind that there was no future with Harvey. Cindy also sometimes feared that she wouldn't have a life at all, but then she consoled herself that she could live without it because she was doing so well. She's got a job she loves, an apartment of her own. She's strong and independent, just like she dreamed. "Come back to us again. You are our most frequent customer," smiled Cindy at the slender blonde who was just getting up from her chair, admiring her new scarlet manicure. "You're the best," smiled back at Ariana. "Tony will be shocked. He says I'm too bright, like a butterfly." Cindy sighed. Ariana was only talking about it, Dinka. She seemed to be very happy. "When you marry your treasure, for the wedding look only to us." She winked at the girl. "What?" Ariana rounded her eyes. "Wow, you thought Tony was my boyfriend, didn't you?" "No," asked Cindy cautiously. "Oh, you probably thought that because I talk about him all the time," laughed Ariana. "No, Tony is my big brother. And that's even better than a boyfriend," said Cindy. "A boyfriend can leave, but a brother will always be." "That he is. He promised he'd pick him up and that we'd go to the zoo together." Ariana picked up her purse, paid quickly, and raced to the entrance of the salon, where a tall brunette man of about 35 years old had just appeared. "What, a new look again?" He gently hugged his little sister. "Do they feed you cakes with bonuses that you come here all the time?" "Joker." Ariana poked him lightly in the side. "You don't know anything about women's fashion. Here, meet the queen of the salon, Nadezhda." "Hello." Cindy smiled politely at the brunette and extended her hand. "Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too." The handshake was strong, but neat. A minute later, Tony and Ariana left. The next day, Tony came to the salon and immediately, without any long preamble, asked Cindy out on a date. The girl was shocked. "What kind of proposal is that?" "I'm not saying it was love at first sight, but I just thought I'd make a quick first move before someone else did. I'm afraid such a charming businesswoman doesn't lack suitors." "I don't need admirers at all," Cindy replied, embarrassed, and tried to look as nonchalant and disinterested as possible. "And I don't go on dates that easily." "Good. Let's make it complicated. Whatever you like." The masters in the hall, as well as some of the clients, have their ears perked up. "You're not just kicking them out, are you?" Tony waved his hands. "All right," Cindy blushed. "I'll buy you a cup of coffee. There's a place near here." And as it happened, the first date was followed by a second, and then another, and another, and another. Tony wasn't trying to wow Cindy or impress her, although he had opportunities. The guy owned a couple of auto repair shops. They just met somewhere for a cup of tea or coffee to talk about everything. Sometimes they went for a walk in the park. Once they visited a skating rink and an art gallery. It turned out that they had many common interests. Looking back later, Cindy could not understand at what point it turned from an innocent infatuation into a romance. But it did, and one beautiful, really beautiful, clear and warm May day, Tony proposed to her. "I've been married before," Cindy said, pulling her hands away and hiding them behind her back. "And I've never been married. Look, I don't know who hurt you. I just feel sorry for the man who couldn't see the miracle in front of him. But I can promise you that I'll do everything I can to make our family happy. Do you believe me?" Cindy realized that this was a turning point in her life. She could keep looking back on the past, let it rule her, or she could just push it away, lock it behind doors, and throw the key to them in her imagination far, far away into the ocean. She stopped hiding her hands behind her back. She stepped closer to Tony. She looked into his eyes. "I believe you. I want us to have a family. I want us to spend every day together. And I'll do my best to make us happy too. And if one day we have a hard time, we'll support and understand each other, won't we? Right?" Tony smiled and kissed her tenderly. They were standing in the park, and the trees, dressed in spring blossoms, were dropping petals on them under the gusts of light wind.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.